Winter is here and temperatures are definitely dropping, so if you need to make something to keep you warm this winter season, then this video is going to be exactly what you need. Here you're going to learn how to draft and sew 5 very simple but very useful and functional winter accessories. We're talking things like a pair of mittens, a hat, a ski mask or otherwise known as balaclava, a quilted vest, and we're going to start the list with a really simple project like a fuzzy infinity scarf. Now, infinity scarves can be made from a variety of different fabrics, and they're really great for using up those larger remnants that you might have. Here you see one in lightweight and drapey woven. I have here one from really nice fluffy knit. Here's one from an open work knit. So as you can see, they're all different, smaller and bigger, but the main characteristic of an infinity scarf is that it forms a loop. There are different ways how you can make that loop, even double it up and twist it, but today I'll show you the simplest version, and from there you can experiment. As always, fabric comes first, so here I have remnants of faux sherpa that we're going to piece together and make my infinity scarf, but you can choose whatever fabric that you would like. To determine the length of the scarf and how much fabric I need, I usually just take a measuring tape, I wrap it around, and I see what's going to be enough, where I want that scarf to end, how I want it to drape. Here, let's just go for the entire length of the measuring tape, and that is about 60 inches or 150 centimeters. When it comes to the width of the scarf, it does depend on the effect that you want to create and also on the fabric that you're using. So here, I'm using a really fluffy material, so I really don't want it to be that wide. And I think if we aim for maybe 14 inches or 12 inches, that would be enough, but I'll need to see what kind of remnants I have. And if we fold it in half, because that's what we're going to do when we're going to sew the scarf, it's going to be this wide. But if we take a look at this lightweight scarf, you can see that the width is much larger. And that's because the material itself is really thin, but it does compact. As you can see from the remnants that I had, I managed to cut 3 rectangles, and then I pieced them together in order to make one long piece of fabric. So let's go ahead and measure and see what do I have over here. Lengthwise, oh, you know what? It is nearly 60 inches, it's 59 inches, so that's perfect. And then width-wise, it's about 10 inches. Not necessarily the measurement that I was going for, but it will work. The order of sewing is really easy. First, we're going to start by sewing the long sides. So we're going to bring our scarf like this, right sides facing, and that's where we're going to sew the long edge. But we're not going to start at the very corner. We're actually going to step away about 5 inches, and we're going to do the same on the other side as well. Next, let's pin it all the way to the other side of the scarf, and now let's sew it. Now you can use a sewing machine, a serger, or even hand sew it if you would like, but for projects like these, I really do love using my serger. The fabric that you chose for this project is going to dictate what stitch to use on your sewing machine. Zigzag is great for knits, and straight stitch is great for wovens. When we're done, we're going to have this long sausage with open ends like this on both sides. So now we have to turn it right side out. So I'm going to stick my hand and I'm going to turn it. There we go. Now bring the open ends together like this. Make sure that it's facing the right direction. Place them right sides together and let's pin them. Once done, we will sew them exactly the same way as we did in step number 1. After this, all we have to do is turn it in and close by hand this opening. For that, we're going to turn in the raw edges of the fabric towards the inside. We're going to pinch and hold it with our fingers. Grab a hand sewing needle and thread. You can of course do that on the sewing machine as well, but I do find that fluffy knits like this one actually take hand sewing really well. So again, as always, it does depend on the fabric that you're going to be using. In my case, I went with a very simple blanket stitch. When the opening is closed, that's it, your scarf is ready. So right now, let's try it on. step to keep your head and your ears warm, we're going to be drafting and sewing a hat. It is a slouchy beanie type, so right here on top you do have a little bit of extra, which gives you enough room if you decide to wear it with a ponytail or perhaps a bun. You can also make one lined or unlined with a pom-pom or without, and we're going to explore all of these options. This project is also great for fabric scraps, and when it comes to fabric, you want something that has stretch to it, either a two-way stretch or four-way stretch, whichever one you have. Now, knits can be on the chunkier side, like you see in this example, or on a thinner side. So here you'll have to decide how thick or thin you want your hat to be. Also, fleece is another really great option, and that's what I'm going to be using today. I have these fabric scraps left over, and I think these are going to be perfect. Now, the bottom band of the hat is going to be made from ribbing, so take a look if you have that on hand as well. To draft this pattern, we're going to need just two very simple measurements. So grab your measuring tape. If you don't have one, it's not a big deal. You can also use a string of yarn or thread. That will do as well. So first, we're going to measure our full head circumference. So I will do that a little bit higher, just above my ears. So grab your measuring tape, place it around your head. I hope you can see it right over here. It goes on the bottom all the way to my forehead. We're going to bring the end of the measuring tape together with the other side. Then place your finger on there and take it away. Now mine says 22 inches. Divide that in half, and that is going to be the first measurement that we're going to place in a straight line, just like you see me do on your screen. Next, we're going to divide this measurement in half, so we're going to find the middle, and from here, we're going to place this next measurement. To find this measurement, once again, we're going to take our measuring tape, place it on the forehead, like so, and then we're going to bring it all the way to the back of our head. Place your finger over here, and then take it away. For me, this measurement is about 38 centimeters or approximately 15 inches. In this case, I do like using centimeters because it's just easier to do math. Now on this line where we have divided that in half, we're going to take a straight perpendicular line up. And on this line, we're going to take 70% of the measurement that we just took. And the easiest way to go about it is to first divide it in half. So 38 centimeters in my case, divide in half, and that is going to be 19. So I'm going to start with 19 and make a mark. Then take 19 and divide that in half, which is going to be 9.5. So from this point right over here, we're going to take 9.5 centimeters up. So once again, from here till here, we took half of the measurement that we took from the forehead all the way to the back of your head. For me, that was 19 centimeters or 7.5 inches. Now from here till here, we took half of this measurement, the one that we placed right over here. And for me, that was 9.5 centimeters, or if you're working in inches, of course, you're gonna get your own measurement. So this straight line is going to be the total height of our hat. That's it, the base for our hat is done. I know it might seem a little confusing at first, so if it does, rewatch this part one more time. I promise you, it's not that difficult at all. If I can do it, then you can do it as well. Now we need to make a really nice curved line that would build the side seam of our hat. I like to do that freehand using dashed lines and a pencil to get started with. Once I'm sure of the shape, then I outline that in a marker. Of course, you can use a round plate or any other round project to help you out with that curve. Make sure that the bottom corner is 90 degrees to get started with, and then copy one side to the other to get a full pattern of your hat. To create shaping on the top of the hat, first I'm going to take about 2.5 inches for the adult hat from here. So 2.5 inches, and I'm going to make a mark. Then I'm going to take 1 inch from each side. So 1 inch here and 1 inch here. And then I'm going to draft dart legs. Last thing to do is to mark the stretch direction of the fabric on your pattern. Now, we first drafted and made a hat together about 5 years ago, so current members of the channel, you do have a step-by-step instruction sheet on how to draft this as a part of your membership from the very first time that we drafted a hat together. So definitely check out your members perks, and thank you so much for being a member. When it is time to cut the pattern, we're going to place it on the fabric. Don't forget that we do need to add seam allowances. In my case, I'll go for 3/8 of an inch. The straight line that divides our pattern in half will need to go parallel to the selvage, and a stretch direction is going to go in the other way. Once we have pinned our pattern, of course, we're going to cut it out, and we will need one for the front and one for the back. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to sew the dart. So fold your pattern pieces in half, right sides facing, like this. And next we're going to pin the dart. Now you can complete this on both on a sewing machine or on a serger, or even a third option, you can do this all entirely by hand. The main thing to remember is that if we're working with knits, we want a stitch that has stretch to it. So in this case, I would go either for a lightning stitch or a zigzag. Once both darts are done, currently the pattern pieces are wrong side up, so we're going to pop them open like this and place them right sides together. Now we're going to pin from one end all the way in a curve to the other end, and right here where we do have the darts, because I've used a lightning stitch on a sewing machine, I can actually press the seam allowances open. If you did use a serger or a zigzag stitch, make sure that you nest them. So one seam allowance is going to be facing one way and the other way. So that way you can avoid the bulk. After completing this, we are ready to move on to the last and final step, which will be attaching the bottom band. Here I have some leftovers of these shades of brown ribbing, and I think that this one is going to go quite nicely with the hat. I think it's kind of hard for you to see, so I'm going to put my grid underneath so that way the brown really stands out. I have aligned this edge with the edge of the hat, and currently the bottom width over here is about 12 inches. That's already including seam allowances and everything. So I will need to cut my ribbing a little bit shorter than that. So first I'm gonna go about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches shorter, so right over here. This is going to ensure that I have negative ease in my ribbing and that the final hat is going to sit nice and snug on my head. Next, I already know that I didn't have enough of my ribbing to cut one long ribbing and then fold it in half. So this will need to serve as two sides, the front and the back. So I'm going to fold it in half like this and cut the bottom. The measurement over here is about 5 inches, but you can vary that depending on how much fabric you have and what you like. Now, making sure that these are placed right sides facing, so right sides together, we're going to sew this edge and this edge. Now, if you're just not sure if this is going to be too tight or too loose, the good thing about sewing is that you can always try it on before you commit to the final measurements. So whatever you have right now, you can pin it or baste it together, put it on your head, and there you can determine whether you need adjustments or if you're good to go. When done, we're going to place these right sides together, aligning at the seams so that way those are enclosed on the inside. There we go, and we're going to fold it in half like this. Now these side seams we're going to align with the side seams of the hat. We're going to do that by placing the hat and the ribbing right sides together and then pinning them. Now we're going to attach these two together, stretching ribbing so that way it matches the total width of the bottom of the hat. To make it easier for you, if you'd like, you can also make a halfway point. So you can mark a halfway point here on the ribbing and halfway point here on the hat. To find the halfway point, you're just going to align the side seams and then find the middle right here. This is going to give you an extra point of reference, so that way you stretch your ribbing nice and even. First, we're going to start at one of the side seams, place it underneath the presser foot, lower it, and do a couple of stitches. Once done, make sure that you place the needles back inside of the project. Then grab the halfway point of the project and stretch. Hold the halfway point with your left hand, and with your right hand, adjust the fabric, making sure that all of the edges align, and then continue sewing. Once you have reached the halfway point, remove the needle and repeat exactly the same steps. So find the next pin that we have, which was right here by the side seam. Hold it, stretch it, align everything, and continue sewing all the way around. This is what we're going to have when done. Now we just have to turn it right side out. If you want a pom-pom for that, you can use yarn. If you have some, you can use faux fur, or you can also use jersey scraps that you stretch and sort of turn into little tubes and then make a pom-pom out of it. I'll be using some really fun faux fur. To get that going, first I drafted a circle about 3 inches in diameter and then cut it out. Next, we're going to do a basting stitch on the edge of the circle, so that way we can gather it up into a pom-pom. However, first I'm going to fold in the edge about, I would say, 3/8 of an inch, and then do that basting stitch, so that way all of the raw edges are on the inside. Once you've made it all the way around, grab the needle and the thread that's still attached and then pull on it. Look at that, how fun! On the bottom of your pom-pom, do a couple of stitches across, so that way you can ensure that it's properly closed off. And then all we have to do is attach it to the actual hat. With the same hand sewing needle and thread and hand sewn stitches, we're going to attach it right here where we have that little dart. I did promise that we're going to do 2 options, the unlined one, the one that we just completed, and the lined option. The steps are going to be nearly the same. The only difference is going to be at the final stage of putting this all together. So let's take a look. Since we're doing this one with the lining, you will need to cut 2 pattern pieces to assemble the outer hat. In my case, it's also made out of fleece, just like the one that I made for myself. And you will need to assemble the lining. The lining pattern pieces are going to be exactly the same as for the outer hat. And in this case, I used a really lightweight rayon knit. In the lining right over here, you also want to leave a little opening, so that way we can turn everything right side out. In my case, the opening is just about 2 inches. Next, grab your ribbing, and here we're going to be working in 1 layer. So first, we're going to open this up, and just like we did in the previous example, we're going to pin it to the outer layer of the hat. Once done, I'm going to sew it in the round. This is what I have when done. Now I'm going to grab my lining and attach it exactly the same way, but this time from the bottom. It kind of looks like a little bit of a jellyfish at this point. Now we can place our hand inside of the opening and turn everything right side out. Then I'm simply going to place one inside of another, making sure that I fold the ribbing in half. So I'm going to align the ribbing here and the ribbing here and give it a quick pin so that way it doesn't move. And I'll do the same on the other side. At this point right over here, I like to do a couple of hand sewing stitches through all of the layers, so that way I can secure the ribbing in place. And I'll do that on both sides where the seam is at. I'm also going to use hand sewing needle and a thread to close up the opening that we left in the lining. Now this is the look from the outside, and this is the look from the inside. At this point you can add a pom-pom if you'd like, and I made mine from leftover fleece that I cut into strips and then tied into a pom-pom. Well, there you have it, we made a hat. Project number 3 is a pair of self-drafted mittens, and these are perfect to make as a set with infinity scarf and with a hat. Now, just like in the tutorial where we drafted and sewed a hat, you can make your mittens lined or unlined. So we will explore both of the options. I will be sewing the unlined version today, and as you can see, it does match my hat, so I'm going to be using fleece remnants. When it comes to other fabrics that you can use to make your mittens, I would say to opt for something that isn't too porous, so something that wouldn't let through the moisture quite easily. So that's why I like fleece. It also has a little bit of stretch, but that's not necessary in this case. However, for the bottom of the mittens, I am using ribbing, which needs to be stretchy, so that way it sits comfortably around your wrist. For the drafting process, you're going to need a ruler, a pencil, and your hand. I start by placing my hand like so, tucking in my thumb underneath, and then outlining it. Right here, I want to make sure that I go about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters past this bone. When done, this is the outline that you're going to have. Now we need to tidy this up. I have outlined my pencil markings in green markers so that way you can see a little bit better. First, I'm going to measure the widest part of my outline, which is going to be right here, and then divide that in half. From here, I'm going to take a straight perpendicular line down. Here on the bottom of my wrist, I'm going to repeat this line that we measured right over here. For me, it was 9 centimeters, and I divided that in half at 4.5 centimeters. So right here, I'm going to do exactly the same, 4.5 centimeters this way and 4.5 centimeters this way. You can do this in inches, you can do this in centimeters. It's definitely up to you. From here, I'm going to take 2 straight lines up. So from the bottom all the way up. To make it easier to round the top, let's extend this line all the way up. And now, from the tip of the fingers right over here, we're going to very nicely round it. I'm going to fold my paper in half and repeat the curve, so that way the curve on the left and the right sides are identical. For you to be able to see a little bit better, I'm going to copy the outline that we're going to be working with to the left. Now currently this is just a little bit wider and a little bit bigger than the actual outline of our hand. Now our hand isn't completely flat, right? So we have thickness to it. So go ahead and measure it. For me, it's about 1/2 inch or so, but since here we do have a little bit of extra width on the sides, I think I'm going to add about 3/8 of an inch from here all the way around and to the bottom. For those who are working in centimeters, 3/8 of an inch is just about 1 centimeter. At this point, this is going to be the back side of our mitten. With that, we're moving on to drafting this side of the mittens, but here we have an extra detail, which is going to be your thumb. I have copied this detail one more time, so that way we have one that we can work with. And we're going to start by aligning your hand with the bottom line of the pattern. The bottom line corresponds with this little bone that we have right over here. So place your hand like this, and then flip it over. I find that the easiest way to determine how to separate the back pattern piece of your mittens is to follow this line right over here. So it's a little bit above, in my case, I would say about 1 inch above the actual thumb. So I'm going to take a ruler, I'm going to place it right over here where my line is on my palm, and then I'm going to mark that on my pattern. After that, we are going to make a straight line. When this is done, we have to draft the pattern piece for the thumb. Here I find that it's the easiest if you align the edge of your paper with the edge of your table, then take your thumb and place it like so. So you want to capture the entire thumb. Then take your pencil and draw an outline. We're going to do the same thing as we did right over here. Make sure that we mark the middle of it and sort of straighten it out a little bit. After that, we're going to add onto it, repeating the same step as right over here. So adding, in my case, about 3/8 of an inch all the way around. Don't forget that all of this also needs to be symmetrical. Now, the final outline of the pattern I've marked in green marker, and our thumb pattern piece is ready now. Next, I'm going to make one more copy of my thumb pattern piece. After that, we're going to cut out both of them. Next, grab some tape and let's cut out this pattern piece as well. We're also going to cut it apart at this line. Now we simply need to attach our thumb pattern pieces. Since we were drafting a pattern for this hand, we are going to attach them on this side. So I take at least 1/2 inch from the edge, and you can mark it for yourself with a pencil. Then take one of your thumb pattern pieces, place it at that 1/2 inch mark, and tape it together. We're going to do exactly the same thing on this part, but this time this is going to be facing down. So now we're all done with the pattern. We have the front and 2 pieces for the back. You don't really need a pattern for the ribbing, as this is going to be just a rectangle, and that will depend on how stretchy is your ribbing. Now, personally, I find that this is probably one of the most logical ways how to go about drafting your own mittens, especially when you take the anatomy of your hands as an example. But always remember that there is more than one way how to do this or that in sewing, and there's probably a dozen more ways how to draft your mittens, so you can always make adjustments to achieve exactly what you want, so don't be afraid of that. When we're cutting our fabric, here are a couple of things to remember. Number one, the center line of the pattern here is also going to be sort of like the grain line, so it's going to go parallel to the selvage of your fabric. The stretch direction of the fabric is going to go in the opposite direction, so you're going to place your pattern like this. You're also going to need to add about 1/4 inch of seam allowance all the way around. The amount that we added right here on the pattern wasn't for the seam allowance, it was for the thickness of our fingers, so we need to add the seam allowance as we cut our pattern. Another tip regarding cutting: when you are approaching these parts around thumbs, don't make them that angular. Instead, round it up a little bit. It's going to make it easier for you in the next step when you're sewing this all together. When you're cutting these pattern pieces, you will need to cut 2 of each mirrored, because you have one left hand and one right hand. Currently, my pattern pieces are right side up, and to start putting this all together, we're going to take these 2 pattern pieces and we're going to place them right sides together, like so, aligning the thumb area and all of the other parts. If it makes it easier, you can pin it to hold it all together. Now we can move on to the serger or your sewing machine. On a serger, we're going to be using a regular 4-thread serger seam. On a sewing machine, you can use a zigzag stitch or a lightning stitch. When working on a serger, to make this transition and this transition easier, you can go ahead and pull this a little bit aside to sort of create a straight line, but don't pull it too much so that way you don't stretch the fabric. If you're concerned about cutting some fabric away accidentally, then you can always disengage your knife. This is what we're going to have once done. Now, let's take this pattern piece and place these right sides together once again. Keep these seam allowances flat, and now we're going to sew from here all the way around until here. Now, I know that with how sewing is portrayed on social media, it oftentimes makes us believe that everything should come together like this within 30 seconds and after the first try. But I also do think that most of us understand that that's not how life is. So when you make your first mock-up, just one mitten, be prepared that you might need to make some adjustments, and that is totally okay and totally normal. Engage your logical thinking. If you need to make it wider, make it wider. If you need to make it bigger or taller, make it bigger or taller. It's all in your power. And making a mock-up, not just in this case, but when you draft clothes and other things, will give you that extra confidence. Plus, it will give you that necessary data that will tell you what you need to keep in mind for the next time. Since the seam allowances are 1/4 inch and we're working with fleece, we don't really need to clip in order to turn out curves nicely. So when you're ready, use rolling motion between your thumbs and your fingers in order to turn everything right side out. Last step is to attach the ribbing. Here I've cut a rectangle that is about 5.5 inches by 4.5 inches. Your measurements can be different, but I find that when we fold it in half and attach it, it creates a nice little cuff that sits very comfortably around your wrist. First, what we're going to do is we're going to place it right sides together. So we're going to fold it right sides facing, and we're going to sew this side. When done, fold it in half, wrong sides facing. Make sure that the seams are matching. And while we have it folded with one seam on one side, let's go ahead and mark the other side. You can mark it with a marking tool or with a little notch or a pin. Now we're going to place this cuff on top of our mitten, or I guess around our mitten. We're going to match the notch that we just made with one side seam and then pin it, and then this seam on the cuff with another side seam of the mitten. Now we're simply going to attach the ribbing while stretching it in the round. This would be done exactly the same way if you were to attach a cuff on a shirt or on the bottom of the pant leg. After this, all you have to do is tidy up any of the loose threads and tuck them in, and that's it. Your mittens are done. Let me show you a bit more up close this area of the thumb and right over here. But other than that, it was pretty straightforward, wasn't it? Now what we just made is a pair of unlined mittens, but if you want to line them, we're going to follow exactly the same steps as we did when sewing a lined hat. So let me give you a couple of pointers. Here you're going to do all the same steps. The only difference is that you're going to construct the outer shell and you're going to construct the lining using exactly the same pattern. Now if your lining is quite lightweight, I find that you don't necessarily need to adjust anything, but if you are choosing a thicker lining, you might want to make your mitten a little bit bigger to account for that. Also, in your lining right here on the side, you want to leave a little opening. I would say about 2 inches or so that way we can turn the entire mitten through it. Next, we're going to attach a single layer of ribbing. So don't fold your ribbing like this, like we did in the first option. Instead, leave it like so. And then place it over your mitten and attach in the round just like we did in the first option. Here's what that looks. Next, we need to do the same for the lining. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the lining. This is a wrong side out, so right over here I have all the seams. And we're going to place our mitten inside of it all the way until we reach the other edge of the ribbing. Then we're going to once again stretch the ribbing so that way it matches the opening of the mitten, and then sew it in the round. And there we have it. Just don't forget to tuck in the tail. Now we can turn everything right side out through this little opening. You don't have to turn out the thumb because we're going to be tucking it right in. So instead, take your thumb, place it inside of the thumb of the pattern, and take your fingers and place it right here at the top of the lining of the mitten. And now we're going to go inside. We're going to go. With your thumb, go into the actual thumb of the mitten, and then with your fingers, push in the lining all the way. After that, make sure that you turn out the ribbing. Now there you have it. Now you have a mitten that is lined on the inside. Now of course you will need to close out this little opening of the lining, and if you feel that your lining is on a slippery side and doesn't stay exactly put, what you can do is you can do a couple of hand sewing stitches from the inside right over here to catch both layers of the lining and the outside, so that way they stick together, and you can do the same right here on the thumb. But other than that, this is the lined version. Using the same principle but obviously different measurements, I also made a pair of mittens for my daughter, and they do match the hat that we made in the previous tutorial. Well, there you have it. You made a pair of mittens. This next make is going to be particularly great for those who live in colder climates. Now, if that is not you, that's totally fine. You can skip to the next make. But if that is you, stick around because we're going to be making balaclava. Now, it is a slightly more complex make than the first 3 in this video, but still very, very doable. Just go ahead, follow the steps, and let's get started with the measurements. The measurement that we're going to get started with is going to be neck base to neck base over your head, and then we're going to divide it by 2. So for me, this measurement is 12 inches, and I'm gonna go ahead and draw a straight line right in the middle of my paper that is 12 inches long. So 12 inches right over here in green. Now let's go ahead and divide this line in half. So for me, that's 6 inches. There we go, right over here at this mark. Go ahead and take your full head circumference and divide by 2. So my head circumference is 22 inches, divided by 2 is 11, and then we want to place these 11 inches equally on one side and on the other divided in 2. So that will be 5.5 inches for me on this side, 5.5 inches on this side, and together it's going to be 11 inches right over here. Now, this is the bottom of our line right over here. And because we want our balaclava to be a little bit longer and to kind of drape on our shoulders, I'm gonna go ahead and extend this by 3.5 inches. Now you can extend it for a little bit longer, just really depends, but I find that 3.5 inches will work really great for me. So I want to mark the bottom of the original line and then 3.5 inches, and then I'm marking the bottom of it as well. So now what I want to do is I want to create a little box. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's outline the edges of these measurements so that way it's a little bit easier for us to work with them. Now here I really want to say that it took me a little bit to figure out what would be a really good and most importantly logical starting point for drafting this type of an accessory, because I've never done anything like this before. So it took a little while and I thought, you know what, starting with a really fitted hood would be a good base for this type of draft. And that's one of the reasons why the beginning of this tutorial looks and sounds very much like the tutorial where we drafted a hood. And I will leave that tutorial for you guys as a reference in the info box below. And I also want to say that a quick Google search revealed that the average head circumference for women is just about 21 inches and 3/4. And for men, it is just a little bit larger. And as you saw from the previous steps, my head circumference is 22 inches. And when I made the prototype, and this was made just from the scrap fabric and basted together, so it's not sewn, I let my husband try it on as well. And his head circumference is about almost 2 inches larger than mine, and this fits him really well as well because of course we're using stretch fabric. So if I may suggest, you might actually just use the measurements that I have in this tutorial and draft exactly the same size as I have, and then you can also manage the fit as you have cut the fabric or the test fabric, and chances are it will fit you if your head circumference is plus or minus the same as mine. Alright, back to pattern drafting. So we're going to start with the bottom right corner right over here. Go ahead and take approximately 1 inch to the inside of the box. So 1 inch right over here. You're going to do exactly the same on the top right corner, 1 inch right over here. Alright, and then we're going to connect the two. So just a straight line connecting these two. There we go. Now from this new corner right over here at a 45-degree angle, if you're not familiar what a 45-degree angle is, you take 1 inch here, 1 inch down, 1 inch here, and 1 inch here. So it's a box 1 inch all the way around. And if you take from this corner to this corner and you place your ruler through it, you're gonna get a 45-degree angle. So on the 45-degree angle, go ahead and mark 2 inches. So there we go. 2 inches right over here. We're going to do exactly the same right over here in this corner, but instead of 2 inches, we're going to take 1 inch and 3/4 approximately. Of course, depending on the shape of your head, you might need to finagle these, but this is what I took and it worked out really well for me. Now, right over here in this area, what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 inches up, right over here, 2 inches up, make a little mark like so. Then we're gonna take 2 inches and 3/4 to the right. We're gonna make a mark right over here, all right? And then again at a 45-degree angle, we're gonna take 2 inches this way. So 2 inches from the same corner at a 45-degree angle. There we go. So you should have 1, 2, 3, and then 2 little marks right over here. And don't you worry, once we start outlining this, everything will come together. So don't worry about that. I know right now it seems weird. From this point right over here, we're gonna take 3.5 inches down. So take 3.5 inches down right over here. All right. and then take 1 inch to the right, and then drop a straight line to the bottom of our box. Now let's go ahead, grab a pencil, and we're ready to outline the shape of our balaclava. First thing that we're gonna do is we're going to connect this outer line and this intersection right over here. So almost with a straight line, we kind of want to blend it in so that way it's a really nice and smooth transition. So I'm not going to angle it all the way to that intersection. I'm going to angle it a little bit lower, and then we're going to blend it in real nice. There we go. All right, and I'm going to outline this in Sharpie a little bit later so that way you can see better. Next thing that we want to do is we want to connect this point and this point with a really nice curved line. This is going to be the back of the head. Now we want to connect this point and this point with a curved line as well. Then we're going to connect this one and this one. Now we're going to connect this one and this one. All right, now we're going to connect and make a curve this way. So these 3 points, 1, 2, 3. There we go. And we're also going to create a curved line this way. So this is going to be where your eyes are at the nose, and this is where your lips are going to be. And if your freehand circle or curved line isn't really that good, here at a 45-degree angle, you can take about 3 inches and 1/4 this way. So you can take about 3 inches and 1/4, so that way it will be a little bit easier for you to take this curved line. All right, now what we want to do is we want to curve in the bottom just a tiny bit. So what I want to do is I want to take about 1 inch from here, from the bottom, about 1 inch up. There we go. And we're going to connect it to the rest with a slightly curved line, We're going to blend it in right over here. Let me outline this in black so that way you can see what we've got, and we'll go from there. There we go, and at this point you can actually be done if you would like to. You can just cut 2 pieces of this mirrored if you want your balaclava to be without lining, or cut 4 pieces if you would like one with a lining. However, I would like to get a little bit extra style lines because I also want to get a little insert over here to cover my nose and lips, because the chin area and the nose area gets really cold outside as well, and I don't really want this seam down my forehead, so I really want to eliminate that. So this is what I'm going to do next. From this green point right over here, I want to take a straight line down to the hem of our balaclava, and I want to separate this part first. There we go, and then I'm going to do that in black. Another thing that I want to do is I want to measure over here about 2.5 inches approximately. Over here like this, and 2.5 inches right over here approximately. There we go. Pretty much till this point. So let's just go ahead and do that so that way we can work with this line. And that is going to be 2 inches and 3/4. So 2 3/4, and over here, let's go ahead and measure 2 3/4 as well. So now I want to connect this point and this point with a curved line, which is going to create a beautiful front for my balaclava. Curved line. Over here on the bottom, I would like to flare it out a little bit so it would sit a little bit better on my shoulders. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 1 inch to the left, and I'm going to take 1 inch to the right. And then we're going to divide this measurement, this point and this point, we're going to divide it in half, approximately. There we go. And now we're going to connect one side and the other side. We will need to copy this on a new piece of paper just because we're going to have multiple separate pieces. So let's go ahead and outline this in black. There we go, looking better. So now what I want to do, I want to make a couple of notches so that way it's a little bit easier for us to line up the curves. All right, and now let's go ahead and copy this on a new piece of paper so that way you see how the pattern pieces will go together. Now I have cut the pattern pieces apart, so let's go ahead and take a look. This is this pattern piece right over here. So I have also made a cut right over here along this line, right over here. So this is this part, and you see it flares out, right? There we go. This is this part, and we're gonna cut it on the fold so that way we don't have the seam down the center front. There we go. This is this part right over here, and I also want to cut it on the fold, so you see instead of it being curved, I just took a straight line like so, and this part is going to be on a fold, so this fold line is also going to be the grain line because I don't want the seam down the forehead right over here. And then of course we have this part right over here. As you can see, this one flares out as well. So this is how you trace it, right? There we go. There we go. And then we have one extra piece that is about 12 inches long and about 4.5 inches wide. This is going to be the kind of like the mouth and nose piece that's gonna go right over here, so that way you can also cover your mouth and your nose and your chin because it does get really cold in that area of your face as well. As always, don't forget to add your seam allowances and your hem allowances to your pattern, either to your paper draft before you cut your fabric or as you cut your fabric, the way that I do that most of the time. So either way, you do have to have your seam allowances and your hem allowances. So I have cut 2 pieces of this pattern piece on the fold. As you can see, my pattern pieces cut from the fabric are a little bit bigger, about 1/4 inch on each side, because I'm adding seam allowances. You're not going to be adding any seam allowances on the position of the fold. Again, I've cut 2 of these pattern pieces on the fold as well. I have cut 4 of these pattern pieces, all right? The grain line is going to be the green line on the pattern, except for this pattern piece where I've cut this on the fold. Then I've cut 2 pieces of the mouth piece that we have drafted extra, and again the middle of it is going to be on the fold, and I have cut 4 of this pattern piece as well. Now let's talk about the fabric that you're going to need for this particular project. Fabric wise, you definitely need something with a considerable amount of stretch, as you can see right over here. So knit fabric for sure. If I were you, I would go for something that stretches not only in one direction, which would be horizontal, but also in vertical direction as well. That would be the best option for this particular project. So something that stretches really well, and something that is really nice as well, because this is going to sit against your face. So you want something that is pleasant to the touch. Now today I'm going to be using a serger, but if you don't have one, it is not a problem at all. You can surely complete the whole project on a sewing machine, so please do not worry. Just make sure that you're using a stitch that stretches together with the fabric, so either a zigzag, a 3-step zigzag, or a lightning stitch, because we're going to be putting this on our heads and it's going to have quite a snug fit, so you want the seam to be able to stretch together with the fabric. Now first I'm going to go ahead and assemble these 3 pieces for both the top layer and the underneath layer of our balaclava. Now there are many ways how you can go about it. You can also create a one-piece lining. That is not a problem as well. However, I was working with little scrap fabric pieces, therefore this was the most efficient option for me. Again, just turn on your logical thinking and you can definitely find more than one option how to go about this. I'm just giving you the starting point. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm gonna take 1 of each pieces, so 1 of each of these and then 2 of these, and this is how we're going to assemble this. I'm gonna pop this one out like so, and this is how you're gonna go ahead and sew all of these little seams, and then after you're done, give it a really good press, and you're going to repeat exactly the same thing with the remaining pieces that you have. Alright, so this has been sewn together, 2 of these right over here, and I have pressed the seams. There we go, so 2 of these have been sewn. I have also went ahead and sewn these, 2 of these, pressed the seams as well, and the mouthpiece as well. Now I want to take one of these pieces, place it right side up, and then we're going to take another one of these and place it right side down. And we're going to align the seams right over here at the opening for our face. We're going to align them, pin them together, and we're going to sew it in a circle and around like so. Then we also want to do the next step. Take one of these pieces, place it like so, and then take the other one and align the bottom. And we want to sew the bottom like so. Now that that is done, so here I have these pieces that I have sewn at the bottom, and I put one inside of each other. I didn't align them really well, so I'm gonna do that a little bit later. So this part is done. This part was sewn in a circle like I mentioned before, and then you go ahead and turn it right side out and then give it a really good press. This is going to give you the opening for your face. Now what we want to do is we also want to finish the bottom just like we did on this part. So go ahead, take one of these, place it like so, place this face piece in the middle of it. There we go. Align the bottom, and we're going to go ahead and sew it like so, and then turn it right side out. Then you take it and you pull it from one of the sides. Before you do that, give it a really good press on the bottom, so that way the hem would be really nice and neat. There we go. And the bottom is finished and enclosed, and now you're gonna go ahead and give it another really good press, so that way the bottom is real neat and flat. Grab your mouthpiece, this piece that is just a large rectangle, all right? Now we're going to, and you can also try it on yourself before you do that, because obviously we're all different, so you might need to adjust the position of that, but I'm going to pin mine just below this seam right over here. So go ahead and align it on one side and pin it. And we're also going to do exactly the same thing on the other side. Once that's done, you're gonna go ahead and take your back piece, right? And you're going to place it right side on top of this piece. And those notches that we made before, the positioning of those notches, you want to go ahead and align them right now. You want to align this center back with the center front of this piece. So if you have not made a notch there, like I haven't, let's go ahead and do that right now. So we're aligning center back with center front. There we go. And then we're going to align the notches on this side with the notches on this side and the hem as well. Make sure that you sandwich that mouthpiece between this seam that we're going to do right now. Once everything has been pinned together, we're going to sew from one hem all the way to the top, and then you can either continue sewing, or if your fabric is extremely shifty, you can stop here and then start sewing another hem and stop and meet the other seam right over here. This would be also a really good point where to just go ahead and baste this together with just a hand sewing needle and thread, and try it on yourself before you do the final seam, so that way if there are any fit issues, you can address them right now. Okay, now is this cute? Well, that's a debatable question. However, it really is nice and warm and definitely will protect you if you live in a climate that gets particularly cold during winter time. And of course, just use your creativity. You can do like a pom-pom over here, little kitty cat ears over here. If you're making this for your kids, obviously you will need to size down. However, you can put like a dinosaur spikes down a center back. So plenty of really creative solutions how to jazz it up to your style. The last project on our list is a quilted vest. Now I have to say that mine is a little shorter because I do live in a milder climate, but remember that it's totally up to you when it comes to design, length, width, and whatnot. So if you need your vest to be longer, if you want to add a pocket or another type of closure, you can definitely do it. Take this as a base and then add all the things that you need. Now vests are actually really versatile and they're great for layering. And depending on what fabric you make them from, you can make them for any season. Now, I'm sure you have seen this faux fur vest that my mom actually made for me more than 10 years ago, and I still wear it. It's lovely. You can make some really interesting combinations with it. But when it comes to today, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to be using fabric scraps from my vest, full yardage, or perhaps I could use this button-up shirt that I could upcycle as well. So I haven't made up my mind just yet. But another reason why we're talking about vests today is because they're really easy when it comes to pattern drafting. So I figure let's go ahead and get started on this first. To begin, as always, we will need to choose a base. Now in my case, I will be going for a bodice block with a dart. Now in your case, you can go for that as well, or perhaps if you don't have a bodice block, you can also go for a button-up shirt that has a slightly relaxed fit, or a blouse, for example. Just be mindful that in that case, your adjustments to the pattern are going to be different than mine. Here I have started by tracing the front and the back of my woven bodice block with dart on the new piece of tracing paper. And so that way you can see a little bit better, I am outlining it in black. And yes, to address the elephant in the room, I do have a pink finger. I was dyeing fabric and there was a hole in the glove on my pinky, so yep. And just a fun fact, the color of the fiber reactive dye is called hot hibiscus. It's actually exactly the same color as I used on this shirt, but this shirt I made years ago. Today I was dyeing a different type of fabric, but I thought, you know what, would be fun to match. Now let's get started with the adjustments. And first I want to shorten my bodice blocks, and I will do it on both the front and the back. Next, let's tackle the shoulder. I want to bring each shoulder up just about let's say a 1/4 of an inch or 1/8 of an inch. And then we're also going to open it up from both sides, from the neckline and the armhole. Now, a good thing to mention is that I will do a very quick mock-up after these adjustments are done. So that way, if there are any other design element or adjustments that I need to do, I can do them without fearing that something is going to go wrong once I cut my fabric. Next, I also want to lower the armhole. Let's start with 1/2 an inch on both the front and the back, but of course you can take more or less if you'd like to. Now I am redrafting the armholes. Next, I want to add just a little bit at the side seam. Since my vest isn't going to be too puffy, let's do about 1/4 of an inch. And from here, I'm going to take a straight perpendicular line all the way down to the hem. On the front pattern piece, we're dealing with the darts. So in order to do that, just go ahead and fold in the dart like so. Bring it all the way up. You can also cut it and then bring it together, whichever way is better for you. Take 1/4 of an inch to the side and then do a straight perpendicular line all the way down to the hem, as we did on the back pattern piece. I think I want the top to be slightly curved. So I might just curve in this part over here, and I might do the same on the bottom hem. As you can see, all we did was open it up in a couple of areas like the armhole, the neckline, and the shoulder seam. We also added a little bit of width at the side seam. In my case, I made it shorter. In your case, you can go longer. If you are going longer, you will need to take in consideration your hip width, so keep that in mind. But other than that, this is good to go, so I will do a quick muslin. All of the patterns that I work on, I draft without seam allowances, so I'm cutting them out as is, and I'll be adding the seam allowances as I cut my muslin or my main fabric. After I cut out the patterns, I also double check if all of the seams match, especially if I'm working with a thick marker, and usually that is for video purposes, because that can yield some minor indiscrepancies, but it can yield indiscrepancies. So that's why when I do drafting on my own time, I always use just a sharp pencil. I have cut out my muslin, and now I'm going to quickly baste it together on my sewing machine so that way we can take a look at what we have. Now this is how this mock-up looks on the mannequin, and most importantly, this is how it looks on me. Now a quick note to add here is that this pink shirt is made from exactly the same base that I use for majority of my blouses and button-up shirts. And it's great to have it on because this type of garment mostly is going to be the one that I'm going to be wearing with this vest when it's done. That way I can tailor it exactly the way I want it to fit on top of this shirt. For example, I think I want to open up the neckline here just a tiny bit more and make it a little bit rounder. I also think that I probably want to make it a little bit shorter, like this, and perhaps add a slit at the side seam or perhaps a little curve. I also might open up the front armhole just by a little bit, let's say I don't know, how much is there? Like 1/4 of an inch? Maybe I'll go for 1/2 an inch. I haven't decided yet if I'm going to do some sort of closures for my vest because right now it simply meets at the center front. But at this point, I'm taking off my muslin and I'm going to do all of the adjustments that we just discussed. Now let's try it on again. This is the new side, this is the old side. I like everything on the new side except one thing. Here at the neckline, I actually think I just want to sort of do a neckline like this one and curve it in over here. But other than that, I think we are ready to transfer all of the adjustments onto the pattern. This is going to be the final version of the pattern that I'm going to be using for the garment itself. So I need to transfer everything very carefully. And once I'm done, this is what I'm going to have for the front, and this is what I'm going to have for the back pattern piece. Now at this point the pattern is ready and we can finally get started on cutting the actual fabric. There's just one more thing that I want to add to my pattern. In your case you don't have to do it, but I'll explain why I want to do it. Now I want to add a layer of batting between the two fabrics of the outside and the inside of the vest, and that is going to create quite a thick layer, and I'm a little bit concerned about sewing all of these layers together at the shoulder seams and the side seams. So I thought about it, and I think what I want to do is I actually want to create an overlapping pattern pieces. So instead of sewing the pattern pieces together like this, we are going to overlap them. And for that, I need to add a little bit at the shoulder seam and a little bit at the side seam to create that overlap. To make this happen, first I have closed the dart on my front pattern piece. It just makes it easier to work with it. And then I'm going to add about an inch and a half extension to the side seam first, and then we will tidy up these edges, and we will do the same at the shoulder seam. Of course, don't forget that we will need to do this on the back pattern piece as well. Now, finally, I can give my fabric a really good press to prepare it for cutting, and I will be using this cotton linen blend for both the inside and the outside of my vest. As I mentioned before, I want to create a 3-layer sandwich with a cotton batting in the middle between the 2 layers of fabric. Now, because of that, instead of cutting out an actual pattern pieces out, I will be cutting out rectangles first that are big enough to fit those pattern pieces, because our first step is going to be to quilt it. To do that, I usually use a heat erasable pen or any other marking tool and my ruler, and then I mark diagonal lines so that way I know exactly where to quilt. After the lines are marked, I head to the sewing machine and start the actual quilting. In my case, I'm doing it just with a straight stitch, and usually I increase the stitch length so that way it goes a little bit smoother through all of the layers. Currently, I'm quilting the back pattern piece, which is pretty straightforward. For the front pattern piece, it's a little bit different because there I have a dart. Here I'm starting by marking the dart position on all 3 rectangles for one front pattern piece. After I have pinned the darts, let's sew them. Now when the dart is done, I will go ahead and press them. I will press one of them up, the other one down, and the dart on the batting, here we're actually going to cut it apart so that way we can press the seam allowances flat and reduce the bulk. After completing this, I'm going to place all 3 layers carefully together, making sure that they all align at the dart point and the dart end. After that, all of the steps are going to be the same as we did for the back pattern piece. So first I'm marking the quilting lines and then of course quilting it. Let me show you the final result on the pattern pieces with the darts. Once all of my rectangles are quilted, it is time to cut the actual pattern pieces out. And in my plan, I have decided that I'm going to finish the edges of this vest with bias tape. Therefore, I actually don't need to add any seam allowances at all, since at the shoulders and at the side seams, we're going to be using the overlap technique. So I'm just cutting out the pattern pieces as they are. Alright, now that we have cut all of the pattern pieces, let's go ahead and put them together. First, we're going to take our back pattern piece and one of the front pattern pieces. Here at the shoulder seams, I have marked the 1/2 inch extension line that we drafted on the pattern. Now we're going to place one on top of another, pin and sew right on the marked line. And here it is once it's sewn. Now we have to close up the raw edges, and I already completed one of the shoulders, so let me show you how it looks once done. It's really nice and neat from both sides. So to get that done, we will need to grab a piece of bias tape that's about 1 inch wide. Next, working from the right side of the garment, I will take the bias tape and place it on top, aligning it with the raw edge of one of the pattern pieces. And then I'm going to pin it and we're going to sew it. We're going to sew it through all of the layers, basically repeating the same stitch that we just did while overlapping the front and the back at the shoulder seam. It will look like this once done. Next, we need to trim the seam allowance just a little bit, flip the bias tape over the raw edge, and then stitch down again. Now to enclose the raw edge from the inside of the vest, all of the steps are going to be exactly the same. The only difference is that when you align the edge of the bias tape with the raw edge of the seam allowance, don't stitch through all of the layers, stitch just through the seam allowance itself, so that way that seam isn't showing on the right side of the garment. Once you flip over the seam allowance and enclose it, I also prefer stitching it down with hand sewing stitches for exactly the same reason, so that way it doesn't show on the right side of the garment. Now after the shoulder seams have been done from both sides, now it is time to finish up all of the other raw edges of this vest, also with bias tape. Now you can of course opt for buying bias tape from the store, but I really enjoy making my own. This time I decided to make it from white cotton poplin. I also didn't fold and press this bias tape. Instead, I left it as a strip, and I started by attaching it from the wrong side of the vest with about 1/4 inch seam allowance. This is quite a lengthy process because all of the raw edges from the neckline down the center front, side seams, armholes, and the back pattern piece, all of that needs to be done with bias tape. To finish this edge, now I need to pull the bias tape to the right side of the garment, tuck it under so that way all of the raw edges are enclosed evenly, and then give it a really good press. After that, pin and of course head back to the sewing machine to top stitch it from the right side. Alright, so all of the bias tape is attached. This is what we have so far. So now all we have to do is overlap the side seam. If you want to, you can pin it first and then try it on. Maybe you want to overlap it just a tad more, maybe just a tad less. So you can definitely do that. And as always, there's a couple of ways how you can do it. The first decision that we need to make is how to overlap. Front over back or back over front. And I think I will go for front over back. And then we need to measure the width of the overlap. In my case, it was about 1.5 inches. And then we can clip it or pin it. I'm choosing to clip because there's just so many layers. It's really hard to pin. Once that is done, the other decision that we need to make is how are we going to stitch it down. Option number 1 is to do it on a sewing machine on one side and on the other side. Option number 2 would be to do it entirely by hand. Option number 3 would be to do one side on a sewing machine, the side that's facing out, and to do the rest by hand. I think I like the option 3 the most, so that's what I'm going to do. First, I'm going to stitch it down right here on the edge of this bias tape. The other side, as mentioned previously, I'm going to stitch down with hand sewing needle and thread. After this, the final thing is to attach a closure, for which I made a button and a loop from the same fabric as the vest itself. And that's it. Now let's take a look at the final result. I will say that in my book, it's definitely a winner. It's simple, yet it looks good. It's practical, it's comfortable. Plus, it goes really well with a lot of things that I already have in my wardrobe, which is definitely something that I aim for whenever I make a new garment. Now, if you're craving a little bit more of a complicated and more adventurous sewing journey, that I have one for you right over here, definitely click right over here to see how this jacket came together from 6 different fabrics, primarily made from fabric scraps. Thank you so much for watching this So Easy episode, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye!